It's Ivy Slater, and you're listening to Her Success Story podcast, a show where gutsy businesswomen share their success journey. Hi, this is Ivy Slater. Welcome to today's episode of Her Success Story. You are going to love and be leaning into this guest today. This is something we're going to be discussing, a topic that is on top of mind and so important to all of us. Beth Fisher-Yoshida is a PH.D. CSS, is a global expert and educator in intercultural negotiation and communication. She's the program director of Columbia University's Master of Science in Negotiation and Conflict Resolution, a negotiation consultant for the United Nations, the CEO of a consulting agency, Fisher Yoshida International. She works with U.S. and worldwide, conducting workshops, leadership culture, workplace conflict, and negotiation, and boasts a huge client list from Fortune 100 companies, nonprofits, military security forces, and I can go on and on. One of the things I love about Beth is her recent new book that really connected us. The title is New Story, New Power: A Woman's Guide to Negotiation. Listeners, if you've been following me for a while, you know I feel really strongly about women stepping up for ourselves, owning our value, our beliefs, and really earning, whether you're in a career and a business leader in a career, whether you're leading your own business, but that all women should be able to earn 100% of their value and what they bring to the table. And part of that is truly the skill set in speaking up in negotiation. So Beth, thank you for joining me here today.
Oh, thank you so much, Ivy. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Tell me, how did you get into this whole work around negotiation? I can imagine it's not something when I grow up, I'm going to be a master and an educated around negoation. Where did this come about from?
That's exactly right, because I actually said I will never be a teacher, and I've been an educator my whole life. So
it's amazing what we say.
Right? Don't listen to yourself all the time. It's just some of the time. Well, I noticed patterns in behavior and communication, and I started to notice that in the classes, workshops, coaching sessions I was running, that there was a particular pattern of how women are in relation to negotiation. And typically there's a little bit of a pullback and a little bit of concern and self-deprecation about not being able to do it. And I thought, well, what is this about? Why am I noticing this type of pattern? And I'm not seeing it in men. So I decided to look at the existing research, and there's some wonderful research out there by lots of other people. And basically it was very contradictory. It was saying, well, women should do this, but women should do that. And women do this and women do that. And I thought, okay, that's not going to be helpful to me in terms of how do I turn that into something practical, which is what I'm always thinking, how can I use this? So I said, all right, let me do my own research. So I decided to interview hundreds of women, including a whole study focused specifically on STEM professions in very male-dominated areas. I wanted to identify the strategies and tactics that women use that worked for them in the workplace, because I didn't want to continue to spread bad news. I wanted to spread good news and say, you know what? Yes, you may be struggling and you may be uncomfortable. Here are some things you can do to make it different. And so then I thought, all right, I'm gathering all this great information. I don't only want to keep it to myself. So that was the impetus for the book.
So what are some of the things you've learned? Where do women excel, right? What do we do well? And then where are some areas that we can raise awareness?
Good. I'm glad you asked me what we do well, because so many times people don't ask me that question, and I like to focus on that. What we do well, and what a lot of the literature says and the research says, but it doesn't mean it applies to every woman, because we're all different types of people, is that women are naturally good relationship builders, and we are very communal, right? We're very community oriented. And so therefore we can use that as a strategy, because as far as I am concerned in how I frame negotiation, it's really about a relationship. It's who am I in relation to this other person, and then in a certain context about certain issues and so on. But that's how I frame it, because if I think about the word negotiation, it can be pretty big and intimidating and scary. So I don't go there. I'm like, yes, I know on one level it's a negotiation. Of course, I'm not in total denial about it. But I'm saying, you know what? I am curious about this person. I'm curious to figure out what is important to this person, what this person wants. And so I connect with them. And women do that naturally. Now, it's also known in the research that we can't promote or advertise that that's what we're doing. So I'm thinking, all right, fine. Then don't just state it openly, just do it, because that's what we're doing naturally anyway. So just be relational, connect with other people, because then you have a chance of understanding each other and coming to outcomes that are pleasant for both of you.
What in the research, what's something that has surprised you?
One of the things that surprised me, which is kind of a little scary too, is I was looking into neuroscience research, and I will say I am not a neuroscientist, but I am fascinated by the neurosciences and the work that's being done there, especially because my previous career, I worked with children with learning problems, right? Learning issues. And so at that time, we didn't understand as much as we do now about what goes on inside the brain. You know, information goes in, but after that, it's like a disorganized filing cabinet because it can't be retrieved. So now we have all of this MRI imaging and everything else that's happening, and our brains communicate with each other, even that we are not aware of. So when you are in a conversation with somebody, like right now, we're in a conversation, our brains on some whole other level are communicating with each other. And I think that is absolutely fascinating, because in my conscious mind and in your conscious mind, we're conducting a certain kind of conversation. I don't know what's happening inside my brain and your brain that we're not aware of. So I thought that was really interesting and a little scary, because I didn't know what was actually being communicated.
You know, that I hear you, and I agree with you that it is a little scary, because the brain is something that is, and again, I am so not a scientist, a neuroscientist. I probably, passed ninth grade biology by the skin of my teeth. You know, yet in the amount of reading I have done in the last bunch of years, it's fascinating. It's truly fascinating. And the brain seems to be one of the most unknown areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
And so in looking forward a little bit, when we think about how women come to, we think about negotiation as far as money. Yet there's many, many other ways that we negotiate in this world. It's interesting because we both, before we started, listeners, before Beth and I started going live, we were just talking about our kids, adults, children. And even in raising your kids, can always in this, and that's so much more women prevalent.
Yeah. So when I was writing the book too, it went through a couple of iterations in my own mind before it even got onto the paper. And I decided that originally I had wanted to make it a focus book on women in organizations in the business world. And then I started to think about it, and I was, talking to different people. And I realized that that's just one part of our lives, especially if we work outside the home. But I think women are always working all the time anyway. So I'm thinking, wow, I want to focus on us in different situations. And so one whole section of the book is about different contexts, because you're right, we are always negotiating. And I remember I have two daughters, when they got older and then became more adept at using language, and then used my language, turned it around, and then flipped it and used it against me. It's so exhausting to, you get so caught up, like, what is going on here? And then you say things that you thought you'd never say. And so, yes, we're always negotiating. Some of the things are more important to us, and then we get more emotionally engaged in there, just like with family members. So when we have that emotional engagement, not to say we don't get emotional in the workplace either, but when you have a stronger emotional connection, something that really is of value to you, really hits your core, you become a lot more engaged. And I would say probably we lose some of our skill because we're so conscious or unconscious about the emotions that may be overtaking us.
Is so when we raise our level of consciousness, okay, and I think, I know some of the work I do in companies growing and scaling, and I'm always talking to leaders about, when you go to make decisions, you have to remove the emotion, right? We want to be analytical. You want to, I'll say, age old, just sit down, fold a piece of paper in half, right side is cons, left side is pros, pro con list. Love a good pro con list, right? To make it's important to keep emotion out of decisions, important to keep emotion out of negotiation. It's not easy to do.
Not at all. And I'm not sure we can completely do that because also in reading, there's a level of emotion in every ounce or element of rationality, right? So I think what you're saying also is not only to keep it out, but if it does get into to manage it, right? So not
Manage
to
it.
overtake us, but that we use that information and we use that energy. I think it's really good to do preparation, right? And it sounds like what you're doing, what you mentioned too with your pro con list, that's a kind of a preparation for a decision making conversation. So that means in the preparation, you can figure out the emotional reactions, the emotional attachment, the emotional exploration, and then also consciously say, okay, if this happens, this is what I'm going to do in that moment to regain my control of myself, to be centered and stay attuned to things. So I think emotions are great sources of information, but we don't want it to overtake us. We want to be able to manage them so they actually work in our advantage.
So in what drove you to write a book? Because I know I have written a couple, and every time before I even wrote my first one, and I'm like in the process or 3/4 through the third. Before I wrote my first one, I swore I was never going to write a book. I swore I was never going to write this book that I'm in the current process of writing. I was just like, I'm never going to do that. I'm never going to do that. I'm never going to do that. It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. And, you really have to love it or have some higher purpose in why you're doing this, because I agree, it can be a struggle, especially if you're not getting the messaging the way you want, and things aren't going smoothly. But I mean, I like writing. I've always written something, right? So I didn't expect to be in academia and write nonfiction. So that's not what I anticipated. And actually now I'm having a turn at fiction writing. So I didn't expect it, but being in a university setting, people are writing all around you. And at the same time, I am an avid reader. So I felt like I had something to say that wasn't only a reflection of me, but I had something to say on behalf of a lot of the voices I heard that I think other people could benefit from. Because one of the things that was an interesting experience for me in writing this particular book, I do talk about narrative and the stories we carry and how they influence us and shape us. In the middle of my writing, several times, I would stop myself and that self-doubt would come in and I would say, oh, Beth, who do you think you are writing a book about women in negotiation? What do you know? And then I'd have to self-validate myself. Well, you've interviewed hundreds of women and you've been doing this for over 25 years. And I said, okay, you know something. And whatever you know is not only your own opinion, it's also bringing in the voices of others. So that gave me the confidence again. And then I laughed at myself saying, oh my God, you're doing exactly the same thing that you're telling other women about and how to fix it. And so I was actually doing it to myself as well, both having that conversation with myself and then fixing it so I could move on and finish the book.
I love that you're sharing that. Because it is so true. And I think, and I could speak for myself. I can't speak for others, but I could speak for me. And I know I have over the years had that same, the little quote that goes through, who do you think you are? And it's like, Ivy, really? Who do you think you are? And I feel it again, complete with emotion. And then I was like, well, am I an expert? And I used to play with this for myself. I was like, am I an expert? Well, I'm probably not an expert. I was like, do I have expertise in this? Well, I don't know. Let's see. I've run a business for 30 plus years, this, that, and yeah, I have a strong area of expertise. Yeah. And I know for myself, I let go of the word, what expert qualified for me, and let go of that and say, I have expertise in this area. And if I can share any knowledge and help others, that's the height of level of importance for me.
I totally agree. Because, when you are an expert, you're like this omnipotent person who knows all, and that's just way too much pressure. But you do have expertise, absolutely. And I think that's part of telling ourselves our stories of strength. What is your expertise? Because we all have something that we have expertise in.
So if we could share, and I'm not going to give away the book, and anybody who has not yet read this book, I'm going to give you a strong recommendation to read the book, read the book. because this is it's a very, very important topic for every woman out there to understand what negotiation is about, and to understand that negotiation comes into all areas of our lives. And as we develop more skills around it, the greater life we will embrace in everything we do. And this is not just about the financial piece. Beth, if I were to push you and say, can you share with our audience one tip for women to be aware of around negotiation?
Sure. One tip is something that is not only for women, but I'll focus it on women right now. It's really about developing self-awareness. We don't always know ourselves as well as we think we do, and there's so many opportunities to get to learn more about yourself. When you develop more self-awareness, and I'll give a tip on how, then you are sort of unpacking who you are and all the influences in your life and what makes you who you are, why you think the way you do, why you act the way you do, and why you frame negotiation the way you do, why you frame conflict the way you do. So it's really interesting as you prepare for a negotiation to think about what is the part of me that's really coming forward in this situation, because we all have multiple layers to who we are. If I'm negotiating with my daughter, then the mother part of me comes out, right? If I am negotiating with one of the associates who work with me, then maybe the director part or boss part comes out in me, or colleague part comes out of me. So different parts of us become more prominent in that. And then you have to think about, well, what does that mean to me? How do I act into that role of who I am? So all of that, just think it through a little bit, because you may get surprised at certain things that happen because you haven't thought it through. But if you do think it through, then you're more prepared to be agile in the moment.
I love that. I love that. Giving it some thought, taking the moment to think it through, I think is really brilliant, because so often we're so busy running, doing, being.
That's right. We are. And a lot more on the doing and less on the being, unfortunately.
Exactly.
Giving ourselves the privilege of that time to focus on us is great.
So Beth, share with our listeners, how could they learn more about you and how can they get the book?
Great. So the book is available on Amazon and other sellers. And I have a website, just my name, BethFisher-Yoshida.com. And I want to make an offer. So I am looking to increase the number of reviews I have on Amazon for my book, preferably positive reviews. And if you write a review and you let me know through my website, then I will offer you, if you're interested, a free coaching session.
Wow, that is generous.
Thank you.
Listeners, if you want to strengthen your knowledge around negotiation, and again, I'm going to say, I know I've said this several times, we negotiate in so many areas, in so many instances. So it's a no-brainer to always be doing work within ourselves. It's a great read. So Beth, thank you for joining me here today.
Oh, thank you, Ivy. It was a great conversation. Thank you for inviting me.
And listeners, I always say this at the end, so be ready. Take a moment and identify what was your aha moment or your takeaway from listening today. You took the time to lean in and to listen. What resonated for you? What are you taking away? Write it down somewhere. You could put it in the show notes. You could put it on your phone. You could jot it down on a piece of paper. And then say, what is that one action step you're going to take? Because it's from our actions that we accumulate great movement and great growth for ourselves in our lives, our businesses, our careers. Beth, thanks again.
Thank you, Ivy.
And listeners, stay tuned for many more wonderful interviews coming your way with some content episodes. And we are in the process of setting up some dynamic and wonderful series for the fall. So thank you for listening to Her Success Story.